Hi, Daniel here, Mr. Cuervo Racing. Today we're going to talk about cracked cases, why and how, and show you some pictures, and also talk about case support plates that are out on the market as well. So to start off, Raptor 700 is pretty susceptible to case fractures due to several different possibilities. The most common, in my opinion, is from detonation, and it'll split the right-hand case. It'll split it right through the front counterweight bearing across and into the transmission. Normally what you'll see is you'll see the case break out through the front and start leaking. That'll be like most commonly you'll see an oil leak first before you actually know that the case is broken. So this one is broken really bad, actually, through the transmission, and also broken down through here. But as you can see, this is the inner bearing race. Normally there's ball bearings in there, but this other metal piece here is cast into the aluminum, and as you see, it separated right here. In my opinion, this separation is happens first, and then from having some movement between that steel and aluminum, the case is allowed to move a little more and ultimately ends up breaking apart. A few different theories on how or why that's happening, but basically detonation. Detonation is the noise you hear is all the oil no longer being in between the metal surfaces, like your bearings and your wrist pin. That nice knock is pushing all the oil out of those areas, and it's equivalent to taking a sledgehammer and hitting it as hard as you can on top of your piston. So any little bit of detonation is really bad. Goes a long way. Another thing that breaks the cases is when a crank is no longer true, either sometimes caused from detonation, sometimes caused from another mechanical failure, dropping a valve, hydrolocking an engine, bending a rod. Those can also result in a crank no longer true. And what that's doing is, if the crank is not true, this bearing is shaking and rocking back and forth as that crank goes around, and it builds a harmonic in there and will break this race loose and then fracture that case. So that's another common issue. Most of the failures I see are from either current or previous detonation. Ultimately wreaks havoc on those. When we're doing new builds that are up in the 100 horse range, normally we just start with a fresh set of cases that brand new out of the box, and we know there hasn't been any previous damage on them. So that's kind of the gist of case failures. You see there's a lot of room in between that crack. That was moving around substantially. This one was on a customer brought me this nitrous motor to disassemble and inspect, and it's pretty well gone. Sometimes when a bike is has a broken case, sometimes the crank will move in the case, being that this is broken, that the crank is kind of moving up and down, and on the flywheel side it's no longer in proper vicinity of the pickup, and it causes a misfire. So sometimes initial sign is a misfire in an engine that you can't really figure out, or it's only under load or in tall gear. Sometimes that's from a broken case. So easiest thing to do is pull the clutch cover off and look on what would be this side. You could look in here and look through here to see if there's a crack that goes through there. So that comes to the case support plates. Um, these plates, they bolt in the engine and tie together the aluminum. Basically what we're trying to do with these plates is give more structure between the aluminum and the steel race here. Kind of where that bolt goes through right here, that's the same bolt that goes through right here. So kind of tying, by running those through and running them through this plate, kind of ties that together a little better, or at least hoping to add a little bit more life or a little bit more structure into that. These get a couple holes, additional holes drilled in to tie that aluminum into that race and add some more structure there. This is not gonna fix any major problems. It does, in my opinion and others, help help extend the life of engines under some mild detonation or something like that. Not fail as quickly. But basically these holes get countersunk, rethreaded. 2 of them are threaded from the factory. This plate goes on there. Use some red Loctite, and we run a few bolts. We use fairly long bolts that get a lot of thread pitch, a lot of thread depth down in there. So run those down with red Loctite, dimple the thread over on the backside, and hope for the best. So we have had engines well into the triple digits without these plates that live just fine. So it's more a matter of poor engine building or poor tuning. Putting a piston that's too close to the head that ultimately ends up hitting the head will break this case. That's another thing that happens. I've seen it happen right away. An engine's fine, somebody pulls it apart, put a fresh piston in there, they don't put enough base gasket in it, piston hits the head and cracks the case right away. It has nowhere to go. So if there's nowhere for it to go, the weakest spot for it to go is split right through this thin area in the case. It's real thin through here and just splits right in half. So it's a costly mistake for somebody to do that, not assembling them properly. But like I said, again, most common is from detonation, either poor fuel or poor tuning. So we have these plates available. I install them on most engines. We're doing over 80 horse as somewhat of a precaution. It's fairly cheap to do. What else we're adding in is we're doing an oil sprayer. Basically, you drill a hole down here in the case, thread it, and we're putting a jet in there that's going to spray oil onto the bottom of the piston. We do that as well as drill a hole in this transfer port. This is just an oil galley that's transferring from the clutch cover. So oil's through here from the factory. Transfer port, we're just drilling a hole straight through, lining it up with this additional hole and jet, and it all works out to spray oil on the bottom of the piston. But hope that helps somebody or see what's going on with what they're dealing with, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you.